name is Marianne. I'm a musician and artist. Just as a little introduction, from Newcastle upon Tyne. I've just finished my MA in Creative Arts Practice at Newcastle University. So I've just spent the last 2 years exploring how to create a practice which combines music, visual arts and digital arts. My practice at the moment is very body-based, so my practice at the minute is exploring the somatic experience of trauma, and particularly the experience of trauma on the female body. By background, I'm a performer, so my original background was in music and still is, so in experimenting in different genres, so kind of pop, rock to folk and experimental music. But in the last few years, I've started to bring visual arts into my practice. So that would include lots of different kinds of media. So for example, photography, video, performance art, to name a few. And I've started bringing those all to try and bring them all into my practice in one go. Sorry, 1 second. So the work that I want to present to you today is a work called I Feel It in My Body. It is a video art piece which explores the somatic experience of trauma. So that is the impact that trauma can have on the body. It incorporates elements of performance art, of video art, of sound art, and something else as well, video, performance, sound art, and there's some photography in there as well. There's all sorts in there, which you'll see, and projection as well, which is a key element in that. So I will show the work. I will attach a trigger warning to it as well, because it is on the experience of trauma. It does focus on the female body, and there is some content in there that some people may find offensive. So just to put a disclaimer in that before I show it. And quickly before I show the work, I just want to give a quick introduction to trauma and what it might be. So some people may be familiar with it, some people may not. So I wanted to just give a quick definition from which is an amalgamation of definitions of people who work in this field. So from Gabor Mate, Babette Rothschild, Peter Levine and Bessel van der Kolk. So trauma, yes, so they define trauma as relating to an event, threat or distressing experience that overwhelms the nervous system and our ability to respond. We see that also that trauma, I'll just admit someone else to the waiting room, to the presentation. We've learned that trauma is not just an event that took place sometime in the past, but it's also an imprint left by that experience on our mind, our brain and our body. So it's a whole body experience. It can affect different people in different ways. So it's an individual experience, and this can manifest in a person, as we see here, through hypervigilance, for example, dissociation, muscle tension, to name a few symptoms, and can affect all areas of a person's life. So you might think, okay, why am I doing on this? It's maybe a little bit of a depressing theme. It's quite an intense theme, this one. It's basically a very personal work to me. So having experienced symptoms of trauma, so physical symptoms for the last few years, I wanted to do a work which really addresses and expresses that, to try and make sense of my own experience, while also tackling the stigma of trauma and mental health, which is something that's not talked about enough. Even though this is something that so many of us experience, everyone has mental health just like physical health. So it's really important to address when that's not going as we want it. And also to kind of raise awareness and educate people on the impact of trauma on the body, so not just on the mind. I know that when I found resources which have talked about the impact of trauma on the body specifically, and it's taken me a long time to find these, it's been a really empowering experience for me, in terms of really understanding what these symptoms mean, where they come from, why they're happening, and then how I can kind of move forward in my own healing process. So hopefully making art on this will then help others to relate to it, maybe those who haven't found a voice to express their own experience yet, and also raise awareness of this in more of a public domain. So I'll play the work now. As I say, just for the people that I've entered before, I have attached a trigger warning to it because it is on the experience of trauma, and it does have some content which may be offensive to some. So just to give a disclaimer before I start. All right, so this is the piece.
It really mattered. What needs me? Flower doesn't bloom, when a 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 flower
You cannot heal. You cannot heal in a stable environment where you got that. Where you got that.
when a flower doesn't bloom, when a flower invisible. I am invisible. Invisible. I exist. 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 I think.
So yes, that was as I feel it in my body. Feel free if you want to take a couple of moments to digest. I know it's a lot in one go, and it's quite an intense piece. I'll read you just a little. I'll take a little bit of take a little bit from my dissertation. So this was the final project that I used for my master's project, which I submitted in August now. I'll read you just a little bit from my dissertation on how I would describe the piece, and then I'll talk a little bit about the making process as well. So as I've said before, I Feel It in My Body is a video art piece which incorporates elements of body projection, performance art and sound art, and is designed for the digital space. So it was done in the digital realm, and as you can see, well, I'm not sure if you can see, but it was all filmed and videoed in my room in the lockdown. So it was, yes, very much done for digital space, not being able to be done properly in physical space. And it's intended to take the viewer on a journey through the fragmented reality of an individual affected by trauma. So the video clips shown, which is the performer's female body, so that's myself, occasionally my mum in there, distorted, transformed and warped through projection, uncover dark emotional experiences, so it touches on feelings of shame, fear and isolation. And these are all also contrasted with clips exploring more positive feelings. Now they are in there very subtly, but of self-care, realization and hinting at a route to recovery. So there's kind of allusions there to self-care through tactility, so the kind of like stroking of the stomach in there, the use of the butterfly hug, which was the projection of my front on my back. And this is a regulation technique used in trauma therapy, but also in basically de-stressing and stuff as well. And there's affirmations in there, and also kind of realizations that came up in my own kind of therapy process as well, that popped in, that kind of helped me understand things a bit more. Now, the structure of the piece reflects trauma's non-linear healing process and utilises techniques from trauma therapy, such as anchoring, otherwise known as a safe space technique, in which a person then draws on their own resources, so their own memories of a safe space, whether it be imaginary or real, and what that kind of feels like, smells like, tastes like, looks like, and what kind of sounds you might hear there. And also mimics the techniques used in trauma therapy, such as pendulation, which is a term coined by the neuroscientist Peter Levine, in which the therapist encourages the individual to go between exploring trauma and grounding in the present moment in order to access and process their trauma safely. So the video automatically loops from the darkness at the beginning to the darkness at the end, and it automatically loops to the beginning again, so some people end up watching it again whether they want to or not, this is reminiscent of the way that the human mind can repeatedly examine and re-examine traumatic issues until a resolution is found. So that's a little bit about the piece. Now I'm happy to start talking about the making process, but just wondering if anyone has any questions so far. Okay, if that's a no so far, then I'll continue. So I'll just chat a little bit about the making process. So making process was probably, for this piece, because it was tackling quite a difficult topic and a topic that was quite personal to me, it was about as fragmented as the piece in itself. It was quite difficult because it's dealing with personal experience. Hold on, just because it's my mum, I'm going to give permission for myself to mute. Right. I won't do that with anyone else, don't worry. Yeah, what was I saying? So about fragmentation, that was difficult, but tapping into not only my own personal experiences, I couldn't just do it on that. Tapping into literature on kind of the embodiment of trauma, and also talking to other artists who work with trauma was really important and valuable for me in terms of making this piece relatable and accessible to other people as well. The work itself went through a lot of transformation and kind of regenerative processes in terms of what it would look like as an end product. So originally started off, it was going to be a performance, then it was going to be a live performance, then it was going to be recorded, then it was going to use, I'll talk about this in a bit, but it was going to use brainwave sensors to generate the projection. So to really use kind of as much raw data as possible from me and my experience. And then I also used other media to explore the theme of trauma, so photography and video as well, which we'll see in a minute. The first thing that I did to explore the theme of trauma in the body was using a technique called body mapping. Now I'll quickly go into the next slide and show you what this looked like for me. So body mapping is a technique traditionally used in arts therapy. Again, traditionally in where someone would lie on a big sheet of paper, someone would draw around them, and then they would come off the paper and then use whatever materials they wanted to kind of draw, colour in, relate to, draw, colour in and express things relating to different areas of their body. So for example, what emotions they'd relate to it, what colours they'd relate to it, etc. Body mapping for me, it looked like not drawing it on paper, but drawing it on my own skin. I wanted it to be a really kind of raw experiment and a raw piece. So I'm just admitting some more people. There we go. So yes, I decided to draw on my own gut area, which is where I was experiencing symptoms. I decided to use eyeliner on there, which is quite a harsh material, which I associate with concealing things, and kind of has a real harsh grittiness to it. It's also not a coincidence that as well as the gut area, it's on the womb area. And here, obviously, oh, I lost my mouse. Yes, here is showing me with my stomach kind of bloated, puffed out. This is due to a gluten intolerance, but it's also kind of not a coincidence there that I've included that, because obviously there's like a relation to the womb and kind of looking pregnant here. So the womb areas are meant to be a place for women where we store a lot of difficult emotions, even though it's a place that's meant to be quite fragile and vulnerable. And then really using the harsh words, harsh eyeliner on there, I wanted that to create a sense of confrontation and discomfort. So this was my first foray into kind of exploring trauma in the body and what that meant to me. So I knew that ultimately I wanted to explore trauma in the body, not necessarily through analog materials, but through projection. Now, this could be for a number of reasons. It could be because I've been really inspired by projection and projection mapping from a young age. So going to things like Stockton International Riverside Festival with my dad from the age of about 4 and being really inspired by multidisciplinary works there, which is probably why I'm doing it now. I just recently finished working with an arts collective in Barcelona who specialise in projection mapping and transform buildings into completely different things as to what they were before. There's an example of this here as well, where I had been to, I think it was a cathedral in Reims in France, and there was a light show which focused on a lot of detail on the cathedral that is not visible to the human eye, but the projection really made the most of that and brought things to light that you wouldn't usually notice. I wanted to do that with projection on the body in order to I think that was really important to do that with trauma there. So in terms of like making things visible that aren't visible. So for example, with invisible disabilities, really kind of raising awareness of that and showing that. And then once the projection's gone, the kind of perception of that is gone, but it's still there. I just wanted to show you quickly as what I mean by kind of transforming a surface and kind of showing attention, like looking at attention to detail that wouldn't be there without the projection. So I'll show you what this means with regards to the Reims Cathedral example. And this is using sound there as well. It's a powerful factor. I'm just going to fast forward a little bit to when it highlights different areas of the building. So I'll pause it there, but this is kind of one of the main reasons why I'm inspired by projection and really kind of drawing attention to nitty-gritty details and really transforming a surface. Obviously, a body is very different to a building, but this is kind of where I start to get the ideas from. I hadn't actually seen, before making my work, I hadn't seen too much body projection, but it got me researching into other artists who were doing the same kind of thing. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Where is my next button? There we go. So this got me researching into body painting and body art, first of all. This image is taken from a show called Skin Wars, I believe, and is just shows how much kind of colour and body art can really transform what you see. The other images here are actually projection. And they're taken from artworks from an artist called Nelson Gouda. Now, he does work with trauma and projection. So what he does is he had a big project which was in several stages, and where he went to war zones and collected stories from a variety of people and communities there. And what happened actually then when he returned home, he was then diagnosed with PTSD due to secondary abuse and hearing all of these traumatic things, but wanted to make something of that and to raise awareness of that. So not just of his experience, but of their experience too. So used his photography here to show the imprints and marks these kind of experiences had left on him and can leave on the body as well. So yes, looking into artists like him and other artists, which we'll talk about in a moment. So yes, this got me thinking, as well as text, what kind of things could I start to project onto my body? Now, I did have to wait a little while for the projector, so I started experimenting with kind of very basic little digital collages before that. So they looked a bit like this. Again, they're a little bit comic, these ones, but I started thinking about, yes, what images I could project. So what was really, well, the mouth was a very, very big thing for me in giving the gut a voice and really kind of being able for it to say what it wants. I didn't quite know exactly what I wanted it to say at this point, but I wanted it to have a voice. The gut-brain connection was really important for me here. And again, the feeling of tactility and touch. The kind of comments and feedbacks that I got from people, so from friends and tutors, when I sent out like a few of these images, they said that they could really kind of feel the images, that they were very tactile. And for a synesthete, so someone that really likes colour, as you can probably see by my different edits of the mouths here, that was kind of a satisfying response for me and something that I wanted to take forward. So really making sure that my work was very sensory and immersive, if I could make it that way. The other response was that, especially with the mouth one, was friends saying, oh, that's really funny. Now, I did consider that. I'm like, okay, yes, there is a playful element to it, which is what I wanted. And I was enjoying working with that. I thought, is that appropriate for a work about trauma? I did consider that and reflect on it. For me, I realised that a lot of my work that has addressed mental health in the past has also had an element of humour in there as well. I think that's also part of my personality, but it's also something that maybe for me is required in order to address these things and make it more accessible to people who maybe will find this topic very intense, or who maybe won't relate to it unless there's a kind of lighter element to it. Just some thoughts on that. Then start to experiment a little bit with body postures. So again, these might be also this one people laughed at. So started to experiment with body postures and what kind of state I wanted my body to be in this work. At that time, it was going to be a performance. I looked at the work of Amy Cuddy, who's a social psychologist, who, yes, this quote for me is very important. So our bodies can change our minds change our behavior, and behavior changes our outcomes. So it's really, our posture is really key to how other people perceive us. I then wanted to make sure that in my work, I wanted to include it in some way in my work, postures and elements that kind of achieve the effect that I wanted. So for example, these are little experiments into kind of feelings of collapse, of stuckness, of kind of hitting a wall and not being able to move forward. And here there's a warrior pose and embodied yoga practice, which is self-explanatory. They're kind of empowering, more open poses there. So obviously give a very different impression of the person. Yes, so then the projector arrived and I was able to start experimenting with, okay, where can I place the projections on my body and what do I want to project? The mouth came up a lot in terms of the imagery that I experimented with, and so did water. I realised that the imagery I was using resonated a lot with systems called chakras and dantians, which I'd been reading about in my research on how emotions can impact the body. So just for a little bit of background context, chakras are part of the Ayurvedic medicine system, and they go from the 7 chakras. So they go from the root chakra to the crown chakra, and they are different points in the body which are related to different colours, elements, foods, even times of day, and different kind of energies there. So and the same with dantians there as well. So in Chinese medicine, there's 3 dantians: upper dantian, middle dantian, and lower dantian, which again are associated with different things and different elements. I realised that the water element for me kept coming up. So again, in both the chakra systems and the dantians, the water element and the lower chakras are kind of very essential for kind of like feminine energy. So for female creativity, sexuality. So that seemed very apt for what I'd been doing and looking at and exploring before with the kind of womb exploration stuff there. The throat chakra up here and the imagery of the mouth was really important for me, and again kept coming up. So the throat chakra is the chakra for communication, and especially talking about a topic that is widely stigmatized and often shut down. That was an important topic for me to just kind of keep going at and keep addressing. And for me here, this would be the heart chakra or the middle chakra, which personally I would relate to identity and to truth as well. Now, at this point, I was thinking, okay, so this is going to be a performance and it's going to be in chakra form. So the projections will be in chakra form on the front of my body. And I was thinking, I want this to be as truthful a performance as possible. So I want it to be really raw, really honest. And I wanted to, at this point, bring in as much material from my own body as possible. And this time using a brain sensor. So something called a Muse headband, which would control the projections and sound that would be put out. So taking inspiration from a guy called Maxime Michaud, who I had a really great Zoom chat, and he helped show me how he did his performance. Basically what would happen, which I'll show you in a second, and what would happen is that I would develop a pre-recorded photo or video sequence, which I would then have tested out to trigger certain emotions in me, which would in turn trigger the projection and sound that would be generated as a result. So it would generate the experience that the audience could see, giving a really kind of raw impression of, especially kind of the negative emotions, raw impression of how an individual can be affected by trauma in that moment. So I'll just show you a little bit about how this would have worked with an artist that's done a similar thing, just to give you an idea.
My name is Maxime Michaud. I'm a transdisciplinary artist from Montreal, and I play music with brainwaves. Woo! I'm currently in Ceia, in Portugal, for an artistic residency. I'm here for about a month. I'm developing an audiovisual piece of about 45 minutes where I tried to apply biofeedback techniques to live performance. In my piece, I use 3 different devices. I capture the electricity of the brain with a brainwave sensor, the electricity of the heart, it's with an heart rate sensor, and what's happening inside my throat, I do it with a kind of device I made out of triggers and contact mics. My kind of only reference as a human being is my body, and one of the main ideals of my project is to highlight the body as an instrument. For me, it's a generator, an actuator, a receiver, all at the same time. And I guess that kind of explains my use of such tools. What the device here does, it just like gets volts from my brain, and after I can do what I want with it. So I just transform it, put it in a software. Here is my basic interface, which interprets the brainwaves. For example, when I'm thinking very hard or when my brain activity is quite high, something will happen. Some sounds will probably appear. You can hear the wind sounds as I'm talking. And if I try to meditate, it will disappear and you'll have other sounds, maybe bird sounds. So let me just...
I'm going to pause it just there for now. So this, basically, when I was looking at doing this, I did a few tests and I noticed some pitfalls in the situation of what I was trying to do. And I'm going to take this and develop it for future research. But basically, I decided to, I found these ideas really fascinating, but I couldn't use these for exact, I couldn't use these exactly to express the theme of trauma, because the things that I was facing were, for example, it's really hard to generate emotions on demand, especially when you're dealing with the theme of trauma. It is essentially when looking at the negative things, then that would be essentially me then triggering myself, and repeatedly, if doing this in practice, that's not something that I wanted to do, and it's not helpful for my development process as well. With these brainwaves, what they do, as you can see that he was doing there, they pick up the different, with the brainwave sensors, it picks up the different brainwaves, so delta, theta, gamma, etc. And it can pick up these and the different frequencies of those, but it can't necessarily pick up emotions as such. So it would be questionable as to whether it can detect emotions and be able to really kind of resonate with it, which emotion you're feeling. And then there was another reason. What was the other reason? There were other reasons, but yes, so I decided to take this, park it, use it for future reference, but I really was able to kind of consider this, was considering this, doing this as part of my performance. But it had to take some, my project had to make some changes there. Okay, right, so at this point, I was feeling a little bit frustrated because the brainwave idea came out. I put a lot of energy into that, but I had to take it out at that point. The chakras were sometimes working, sometimes not. They were either too big, so then I couldn't get the other points on the mannequin or on myself, or they were too small and not able to show enough detail on camera when they'd be filmed. So then I had to change my tack. So I started another series of experiments. So these ones which you'll see now will be a lot closer to what you've seen in the actual piece. So I started, first of all, like looking at full body projection. So on the mannequin, first of all, and also on fragmentation. So, yes, sorry. So on fragmentation, so looking, I was taking elements from the previous tests that I'd really kind of enjoyed doing, taking elements from these previous tests that I'd enjoyed and that I really felt resonated with what I wanted to carry forward into my practice. So looking at text on the body and bringing this into a more kind of temporary nature with projection. Again, looking at disembodied body parts and places where they're not meant to be, so unexpected things there. So eyes on the feet, eyes on the back, mouth on the hands. This is actually inspired by a music video by the artist Emmy Curl, who uses projection mapping in her performance. So projects her mouth and face on her hands, on her arms, and uses choreography in that as well. The elements of water on the stomach come in here as well. Again, the front on the back, that butterfly hug that I was talking about a bit earlier, and the stomach here, and that could represent the female kind of biological clock ticking as well. Now, here are some of the ones. Some of them, I'm not sure that any of these made it to the final cut, but I'm keeping these as photos because they're something that I really enjoyed doing, and they're some of the best kind of photos that came out of it. I decided to do experiments exploring depth, and exploring textures, and exploring the text that I would then go on to use in the piece. So quite harsh elements and harsh text. This was the first projection test that I did. So this was at a point where I got very frustrated with, I was trying to generate more ideas from personal experience, which was really difficult. And I felt like I'd hit a kind of brick wall and was stuck. And I thought, right, okay, I'm just going to have to embrace it, go with the flow and go with what I'm feeling now, which was that sense of the brick wall. And I just got fed up, projected a brick wall on myself. And actually it's my favorite, photo of the series. But yeah, so some kind of little coherences and coincidences work there, and a lot of coincidences came up in this process. Now, okay, so sorry, I'll just go back one. So basically at this point, once I realized fragmentation was something that I was looking for, so going back, so these are basically time was ticking towards a deadline. Fragmentation was something that was a really kind of key part of the piece, a key part of the experience of trauma, and the most powerful photo sequences or video sequences that I've come up with so far. So I knew that fragmentation is something that I wanted to do. I wanted to focus on specific body parts and areas, so still looking at areas like the chakras, but not just the chakras. I realized that I couldn't do it, if it was going to be fragmented, it couldn't be a coherent performance, so it would have to be edited into a video. I originally wanted it to be a randomized video, so that when the viewer went on, it would be held on a web page. So when the viewer went onto the web page, they'd experience something different every time. Due to some technical difficulties, I wasn't able to achieve this. However, then I was able to put it into a coherent whole and edit it as if randomized. I actually, from the start, I actually wanted to avoid it being a film. And it kind of came out as one, but it is coherent and incoherent at the same time. So it still has that level of fragmentation that I wanted. Again, like I said towards the start, that the imagery and videos fluctuate between darker emotions, so fear, shame and isolation, and of kind of lighter things, so hope, realization, and kind of glimpses into the recovery process. So I was able then, through the kind of fragmentation and randomization, to include that and include those kind of mimicries of those techniques used in trauma therapy. And yes, then the images on the next slide, the next one, sorry, show things that are obviously like closer and actually drawn from the video itself. So these things here came out as these things here. And here again, kind of looking at shame and isolation. So there's no part where I actually show my own face in this, except from the baby footage, except at the very end, where I show my face on my back. But again, this isn't my own face, so it's a collage of someone else's eyes edited onto my face. Again, not wanting to show that as part of the theme of the piece. The mouth obviously strongly features in here, that carried through the whole process. The sky here was very much about transition, about realization. Again, this is realization here, and it goes with the phrase, when the flower doesn't bloom, and also you cannot heal in the same place you got sick. So these were realizations that came to me in my own kind of therapy process. But also, yes, so the text that I used was either recorded, so it's either my own voice or it's found sound from videos, so sampled. The sound is also something I haven't touched on just yet, but so it's either found sound or samples. The text comes from realizations from my own experience. The whispering earlier on that's actually very kind of direct from my own experience, so things that were said to me that I wanted to incorporate into the piece, but not be so in your face, but subtle and just there. So again, it being kind of very raw, coming from experience, but not addressing that traumatic experience, but more on the impact it has on the individual. And there's also a lot of repetition and cyclical stuff in there as well, in terms of rhythm, which I can argue comes from my music background as well. Yes, all of that. So the sound art, the performance art elements, and the projection all come together to form the final thing. And yeah, and the final thing is, as you saw previously. Now I will, I'm going to play it again, just so that you have the information there, that you've digested a little bit, and to see if you get anything else from it now. So we'll watch the video again. I'll just bear with me one moment. I'll just come back to the original screen and see if you get anything else from it this time. Okay.
If you really mattered, what needs me? When a flower doesn't bloom, when a flower doesn't bloom, when a flower doesn't bloom, when a flower
You cannot feel in the same environment where you got set.
when a flower when a flower doesn't bloom, 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 I am invisible. Invisible. 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 I exist. 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 I exist.
So hopefully after hearing a little bit more about it and watching it again, you got some different things from what you got the first time you watched it the first time around. So yes, that's a little bit about my work. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has on that at all.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing work, and I think like there is a lot of like going on. Like you have some projection work, and you filming something, and also you have background music. So I'm kind of wondering like which one come first? Like you have an idea, but you have the film, you have the projections, and then you also make music. So yeah, I'm wondering like which come first, that you edit a video and then you make the music later, or you have like a music script and then you make the video.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and that's something that as a musician and an artist I've kind of fluctuated between and found it hard to prioritize. For this, I would say I had the visual ideas first. The visual ideas then turned into kind of photography or short video clips, and then the sound came after that. I did kind of do it in bursts of kind of photo and video experiments, and then have some ideas for sound that I recorded in the kind of sound bank and then layered on top of each other. So for example, in the whispering, but I would say primarily, yeah, it was the ideas for the visuals that came first and then the sound. Yes, and then kind of certain sequences came all together. So the kind of invisible sequence came all together, the whispering thing came all together, and then the realizations came in kind of parts. So the realizations, again, as they came from my own kind of working through stuff myself, or from events that I went to. So the kind of first part, so the first with the kind of focus on the belly, the stomach, where it says, if you really mattered, what would your needs be? This came from, actually, I went to an embodied meditation session, which was run by a women's circle, and that came up in there, and I thought, that's perfect, that's what I need, that really resonates with my work. So some of the kind of text fragments came from little bitty things like that, and then I kind of pieced them together. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And I'm also wondering, like, why you put some family videos? Like, is it when you're a kid, like the videos in between? Yeah, I found it interesting, and I want to hear like why you choose to put it in between.
Why did I choose that? Yeah, again, I think that was kind of symbolizing a kind of return to innocence, a kind of return to a safe space. Obviously then they came in they came in with I think the first one came in with the text, think back to a place where you felt safe, which for me then it was then kind of mentally returning to kind of me as a child with my family, and also the sea. So like I'm from the coast, I live by the sea, and the kind of sound of water and the beach and stuff is very kind of familiar and homely to me. So kind of like coming back home, coming back to a place that feels grounded is why I included that. And kind of sense of nostalgia, and contrasting kind of the innocence with the kind of like darker elements as well, and then maybe a nostalgia for past in there as well, which is why I put those in.
Yeah, I can say that it is a very personal work. Yes, and thank you for sharing.
No problem. I hope that it can relate and be accessible to others as well, though. But yeah, no, it is personal, but it's there to share with others to help if it can.
Yes, I think so. It helps.
No problem.
Thank you. That was really powerful and inspiring work that I resonated with a lot from my own trauma as well. I was wondering from start to finish how long the piece took to develop, and how much it impacted on your own recovery journey in either positive or negative ways.
Again, that's really interesting. So I like started with the initial ideas in about kind of February time, but it was so I knew that I wanted to do something body-based. So I was very much kind of drawn to body-based stuff because of the lockdown anyway, really wanting to do something physical, have a sense of movement, a sense of tactility when everything felt very kind of stuck and stagnant just on a screen. So that idea started in February. It started actually when I was feeling a bit poorly with some like symptoms kind of resurfacing there. So I wasn't able to work on that for a little bit. But essentially from February to August time is where the kind of project was in development. It kind of comes in with the kind of recovery question there as well. So again, I kind of came up against some barriers when I was trying for a long time to just generate material from personal experience, and I was trying to look at 6 emotions. So fear, shame, disgust, joy, relaxation or calm. So that there's I slipped my mind who defined them, but there's someone, a very important psychologist, defined 6 emotions, and I was trying to explore those and my own associations with those, so kind of visual associations, sound, and delving to my own personal experience. Trying to do that for a long time was really hard, and I basically had a big period in the middle where I wasn't able to really do anything. I was trying to, but that allowed me to kind of delve into more research, so look at books like The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, have a look at The Body Remembers as well by Babette Rothschild. I'm happy to send these through as well if these are helpful for anyone, but that helped me kind of look at the research side of things more, and it also helped me get out of my head. I think it did help for me in terms of recovery process. So yeah, it stalled things in some ways, but it helped me in terms of being open about stuff myself. So in terms of wanting to address a work about trauma, which is stigmatized, this helped me to open up a bit. Ironically, because there's kind of quite when I say the kind of offensive content, like the cursive words and stuff in there as well, ironically I do feel self-conscious about that, and putting that out in public, even though that's kind of ironic about the subject theme. So, but I guess it's one thing, isn't it, just putting out there, being like, okay, I do feel self-conscious about that, but it's out there for the purpose of helping other people and tackling that stigma. So I think it has helped in some ways. In some ways I still feel some barriers, and it's helped me be open about stuff myself a little bit. What has been really good is that when I've shared it with people who have kind of resonated with it, I know that it has kind of helped them. So I know it's not for some people, but I'm really glad that it has resonated with others, which is kind of the purpose of it as well. So yeah, I'm happy about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi Marianne, it's Sue. That was a really interesting explanation of your work. I found it absolutely fascinating, and I think it's really powerful. I just wanted to ask, So you said you're going to make it public, but do you actually have plans to promote it? And also, do you think you'll do more work on the same theme, or do you feel you want to move in a different direction now?
So I'll look at the public one first. So again, it's hard because it is such a quite a striking work. I do want to make it more public. I think I want to channel it down the right avenues. So I have applied for a couple of open calls with it. So that's kind of in a very art specific context. But I maybe would like to apply for maybe like a mental health open call where people can see this in that kind of context and are looking to relate to things on the theme of mental health through art, for want of a better way to put it. So looking at publicizing it in the right avenues, so not just in the general public, but in down avenues that are already promoting this kind of work. Maybe then we'll go into the general public. Maybe that's where it needs to go. But I think at the minute I'll just channel it down the kind of mental health routes, which seem appropriate, and then maybe branch out. I'll see how I'm feeling with that. With the kind of theme of the work, I think that I am really interested in, I actually became really interested in the bodily experience of trauma, because it is a really fascinating topic. I've started looking, and it got me actually doing a lot more kind of body-based practices. So looking at and practicing yoga, looking at and practicing something called womb yoga as well, which is obviously very specific to women, but it just got me interested in loads of different practices in terms of acupuncture as well, and looking at kind of body systems. So I do want to do more research into that area. I think if I do more artwork on the experience of trauma, it might kind of delve into more specific experiences. So along the process, I talked to another artist who's based in the Netherlands on her work on trauma, and she focuses specifically on dissociation. So the idea of the hyperactive body and the absent mind, and she does that through dance and choreography, and it's really fascinating. And that's obviously in a very specific element of how the body is impacted by trauma. So maybe I might do it more in specifics to really kind of get into the nitty-gritty, and again to raise awareness of specific issues that might not be publicly talked about. So in short, I think I will go down, do more of my own research on the body experience of trauma, but the work that I make will be more refined and specific to certain issues, I think.
I'm Glynis. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
I thought it was good. Yeah, it's really it's quite brilliant actually. And also with the explanation of how you did it, how you came to it. I think the whole thing sort of goes together. But there was one thing that I did want to ask you about, because I was looking at the visuals, and it was the clock going backwards and the petals sort of opening. So I was wondering about that, really. Are we meant to put our videos on, or do we just...
Whatever you prefer, whatever you want, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Okay. So I was just wondering about that, really. I'll put my video on. Oh,
so
sorry, it's not very good quality, really.
Oh no, don't worry. So about the significance of that, so what they mean and why they're in there.
Yeah, well, why they were juxtaposed together, because you had the no, it's not very good video, is it? It was the clock going backwards. There was a shot, and then there was a sort of animation of a flower that was a projection on you, I think. Yeah, that one. Yeah.
So I think from that point, I knew that I wanted to move the video forward. I wanted there to be a kind of sense of rhythm happening there. The kind of flower image came first, so that came before the clock. So I wanted that to be about, and that kind of resonates as well with the childhood footage as well. So about a kind of child or person, then kind of blossoming, but then being held back and by kind of things that have happened in their life, and then kind of seeing that flower kind of blossoming, but then also kind of wilting and falling apart, as depressing as that might sound, but just really kind of showing that and expressing that was important to me. The kind of clock going back in time, I guess, that was in there for me mostly for rhythm, to add to that kind of sense of urgency and also kind of nostalgia and really kind of looking back to the past as a kind of better time. But it was, yeah, for me, a sense of even urgency to kind of go back in time, reverse things, and add to that kind of sense of urgency and rhythm moving forward in the video.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you for sharing the video. It's really, it is powerful actually, with the meanings as well.
Thank you.
Did you work with other, I want to ask you also, did you work with other people who had trauma as well? It's part of your research about looking at people who've suffered different forms of trauma.
Yeah, so yeah, where would I start with that? I think the first people that I looked at kind of research and literature into that, so which explored kind of lots of case studies of people who'd experienced trauma. So for example, through Bessel van der Kolk's work, so that's The Body Keeps the Score. So I mentioned that a couple of times already. But then the first kind of community that I looked to, which explored kind of experiences of trauma, was a community called the Survivor Arts Community, based in Glasgow. And they work with communities of women who've experienced domestic violence or sexual abuse. And they do essentially, it's called community arts participation. They don't want to call it arts therapy, but they encourage female survivors of domestic abuse primarily to express their experiences and their relationship with their own bodies and themselves through art and through music. And they've done some really, really fantastic projects in the last year. So I reached out to the lady who runs that just to understand a bit more about how they use kind of art therapy techniques and express themselves and their experiences through art. So I, reached out to that community there, which kind of resonated a lot with me and my own experience. Who else did I talk to? I talked to Maxime Michaud, who's the guy doing the brainwave experiment. That was not on trauma though, that was on kind of how emotional states can influence the brain and the body. And then for him, he was able to, after a lot of practice with the brainwave sensor, then he was able to influence his state so that he knew exactly what projections and sounds would come from. He would basically do a lot of brain training, so he'd know exactly what he could, he would control the projections and sound exactly, which takes a lot of time and it's hard as well with trauma. And again, I talked to another girl. I'll put a link in the chat actually, and maybe at the end, of a girl. Maybe I can share it now actually. Basically talked to an artist in the Netherlands, and it was a coincidence actually. So it was one friend I was describing my work to. On the night that I described the work to her, she said, "Oh, my friend's just done a performance on The Body Keeps the Score. Do you want to chat to her? She's a dance choreographer." So I talked to her. She has her own experience of trauma and dissociation, which is why she's working with that. And she's a very process-based artist. I'm happy actually, I'll share a link. I'll see if I can share screen. Bear with me 1 second there. It'll go onto my video and then it'll go back. I'll find her work and I'll just share a little bit of it. It's really, really fascinating. So bear with me 1 second. I'll just get her work back up. I think I did also talk to other communities and people. They were the main people, so the choreographer from the Netherlands and the Survivor Arts community. I'm sure there were others, but they are the main ones that I talked to. Sorry, I'm just trying to get the name of her work up on my phone. Okay. Right, yeah, I think that you might find this interesting. So again, this relates to Sue's question of, am I going to do work that focuses on this topic later on? And then I explained that I want to focus on more specific areas. So this artist has done exactly that and focused on dissociation. So I'll share a little bit of her work. I find it really interesting, so hopefully So hopefully some of you will too. So this is her work. She's called Lisa Suleiman, and she's a choreographer, and it's a performance for one person and a screen. Just to show you different ones. It's quite dark. But I'll add a link in the chat for anyone that's interested in having a look at that further. Okay, how do I get back to the chat? There we go. Okay. So yes, so yeah, I talked to the choreographer of that piece and then the Glasgow Arts community as well, which I'm happy to pop a link in the chat. Which I'll do just now. Does anyone else have any other questions at all? No? Okay, no problem. What I'll do...
Sorry, I was just going to say, you talk so eloquently and beautifully about your work. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you very much. No problem. That's great. I was worried that I wouldn't be coherent enough and be quite fragmented like the piece. But no, I'm glad that you enjoyed it and got something from it as well. I'm happy. If anyone has any further questions, I'm happy. I'll pop my university email in the chat as well if anyone wants to kind of talk about it further, or and any of the references that I referred to as well once sent out. That's no problem.
I'd just like to say thanks, Alice, for putting this on. And thank you, Marianne. It's got some interesting. I have been looking at embodied, you know, how the body embodies feelings and how it acts through, I think it was through the Black Buddhist Network. It's based in the US, but they did a lot of work around, you know, racial trauma, because it was post George Floyd. So there was a lot of stuff on, especially in America, with therapists who work in that Buddhist tradition on self-care and because there was a lot of emotions flying around, especially in the States, I think, around well, also here as well. So but it's a different tradition here, because there's not so many Black Buddhists here. But yeah, I think that whole thing about looking how trauma does, because they stressed, and I'd never thought about it before, how it embodies your body. So you have outward, you have signs of, trauma that you don't even realize you have. And part of that is to go through a process of healing. You have to. So I thought the whole process that you've been through, the preparation, the planning, the experimentation, the joy as well, because you have to bring positivity into it as well, don't you? So I think, yeah, it's been really, really good. Sorry, I'm wearing all this stuff. I was freezing. My flat is freezing until the heating kicks in.
Don't worry about it. No, that's really, yeah, it's really interesting how you can, even kind of with kind of underlying stress and emotions, yeah, it's really interesting how they can stay in your body and that you don't even realize it. So for example, with one of the kind of theorists I referred to, which was by Peter Levine, who writes a lot about trauma and the body and trauma, and he I think it was him or possibly Babette Rothschild who talks about a patient there who basically he's coined basically a type of therapy called somatic experiencing, in which you talks about the kind of tension that you experience in the body and releasing that through actually. So let me think of an example. So I remember he had one patient, I think, that was storing tension maybe in his legs or his feet. When he was sitting, he was really kind of hunched up and really kind of storing a lot of tension in his legs. And basically this was to do with the fight and flight response. So actually what he wanted to do was run in the actual event that happened, but he didn't do that, but it was his body still wanting to enact that. So part of the kind of therapy process was allowing him to go and run and kind of get this energy out of his body and release that tension. So yeah, these things are all fascinating. Yeah, I think that we all have like tension and experience, like as kind of one of the books that I mentioned was called The Body Remembers, and it absolutely does. All of our experiences are all kind of stored there, and it's just a case of kind of getting to know our bodies better and being able to release and let go of these things as well. Super important. Definitely needs to be more education and awareness of that, I think.
Oh, I agree, definitely. I was reading some information about how animals in the wild, when they have a trauma, like a giraffe that's startled and chased by a tiger or something, once it's out of danger, has a bit of a shake. And that's their way of literally releasing their trauma. Yeah. But of course, humans aren't necessarily programmed, like through various different generations of not dealing and being aware of these things. When we don't necessarily recognize we've had a traumatic experience, we don't know what to do with it. So that whole embodiment and keeping it within ourselves and not being able to physically shake it off is part of the damage, part of the way that we don't deal with trauma very well. So that's really fascinating, that whole somatic therapy stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, yeah, one of the experience of trauma can be shaking, but then again, that's kind of seen as a kind of unfamiliar thing, like, oh my God, I'm shaking, like, why is this happening? But actually then just allowing that to happen, recognizing that is a symptom of that. And again, like we're all animals, we all come from the same place. So then it's just allowing that to just happen as a kind of natural phenomena, and again, not stigmatizing things. Yeah. Definitely. I agree, we should talk about these things more. I did previously say if you want to send anything to Dwell Time. Did I say that already? Because Dwell Time would be a great place for you to share your work if you wanted to. Sure, that would be amazing. Yeah, that's your publication, is it? And how often do you publish that? I'm just curious to know a little bit more. So before COVID hit, we were just about to launch issue 2. So the current 3rd edition is still as an open call at the moment. Which hopefully will be a print edition, but we're welcoming all sorts of content onto the website. So if you wanted to put your film onto the website, obviously we couldn't print it if we do go into a print edition with that, but all web-based content's absolutely fine. Cool. So sure. Send it our way if you want. I definitely will. That'll be awesome. Yeah. Okay.
What's it called, Alice? The publication. Sorry?
Dwell time.
Well, oh yes, yes. One thing I wanted to ask Marianne was, you had the sea as the natural part of the natural world, but you didn't have any vegetation like trees or plants. I just sort of, because I know that going into nature can be healing as well, but I didn't see any, there was no evidence, maybe that was deliberate as well, no evidence of nature at all.
Yeah, I think again, I'm just using the sea because this is feels like a very familiar thing, return to a safe place for me. So I'm from like next to the sea. This is all kind of reminiscent of my childhood, and
so am I actually. I grew up by the sea. So.
Yeah, it stays with you. So like no matter where you are, it kind of yeah, that's why I included that. I think in future maybe, yeah, that's right. I could include more kind of nature and natural world. I've got the sky in there a little bit, so I've got sea and sky, but yeah, I could definitely do more of that. I think they were just kind of the first immediate things that felt like sky in terms of reflection and sea in terms of familiarity, and that kind of returning to childhood felt like an immediate thing to include there for me, which is why I included those elements of nature rather than others.
I think the sea is quite a ubiquitous token, isn't it? A symbol for a lot of things, whereas sometimes trauma or anxiety trauma, you don't even think about nature at all. It doesn't sort of soothe you or do anything, because it's almost like it's nowhere to be found, especially if you grow up in a concrete jungle as well, or you grow up in a bomb site, or you grow up amongst so much abuse around you. It feels like there's nothing that can be nice, if you see what I mean. So I suppose you don't notice flowers, or so in that sense it felt quite claustrophobic actually, the film. So maybe that's part of it as well, isn't it? That sort of wanting to get out of it.
Yeah, definitely. I think like with a lot of my work, I want it to be immersive. Obviously, this is quite an intense one to be immersive, but yeah, that definitely comes into it. And yeah, kind of the contradictions between kind of contraction and expansion, and yeah, feeling almost like entrapped in this kind of mentality, way of thinking, and yeah, I definitely wanted to get out of that and escape, and those kind of realizations or kind of hints at the recovery and things are a kind of way out of that and a way to expand.
Like the woman in the TV as well.
Yeah, definitely.
I think when you've got lots of the black in the background as well, that's quite sort of space-like. I read that into those parts of the work as well, that it's almost like a satellite or a planet out in space where there's nothing connecting you, almost a bit like a dissociation type of thing where you're not grounded. So that's what I like read into that kind of expanse of black. There's nothing, that like lack of nature or lack of kind of something tangible. There was a body in space, and that's kind of something that was quite powerful, I think.
Yeah, I definitely felt like that was a kind of, I wanted to include that as a kind of a void space, where there was kind of like nothing around. Again, that kind of maybe comes in with the claustrophobia as well. But yeah, definitely, it felt important to kind of include elements of those space along with the other things that were happening as well. Yeah. But thank you so much for inviting me, Alice. That's been really like a good opportunity to share, and I'm again happy to answer any questions, and anyone to find me anything by email as well. That's no problem.
Thanks so much. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you.